I'm going to start with what's going on with Israel and Iran right now. What is your response right now to that bombing that took place in Tehran?
Yeah. I was actually in Israel 2 weeks ago, and we did hear from some of the intelligence community that the Iranians' nuclear program has continued to grow, and that they've been moving forward with their program, even though President Trump has been talking to them and negotiating with them. And I believe in good faith, but it seems that the Iranians have been continuing to develop their nuclear program. They say it was for utility purposes, but we all know that they're trying to develop a nuclear bomb specifically for Israel. But I think it should also cause concern for every country in the Middle East that if Iran has a nuclear bomb and has the ability to strike anyone, that it would create a havoc in the Middle East. So I believe that Israel's doing the right thing by making sure they protect themselves, but it's also doing a service for other greater parts of the Middle East as well.
And then, in your opinion, what comes next following the attack, as far as Americans are concerned?
Well, one of the things that I think is important is that Israel and the world know that America is going to stand with Israel, that they have the right to defend themselves, that they have the right to exist. One of the things that we know about the Iranians, they teach their own children death to Israel, death to America. They sponsor terrorism around the world. Just watching Iran's response last night, they don't even have anti-aircraft defense systems. Israel was pretty much able to fly planes anywhere around the country to take out these targets. They're just going for a nuclear bomb, and if they were able to develop a nuclear bomb, that would be very dangerous for that part of the world and for the world as a whole. And so I think now we will have to watch what happens in the next 48 hours. There is some intelligence that says that Iran has weapons in Iraq that they could use to strike back at Israel. There's a lot of good things going on in the Middle East, and I think that's why Iran is taking this last-ditch effort to really finish their nuclear program so that they have greater leverage. So I think what Israel's doing right now by stopping that is important for us to develop peace in the Middle East.
And then, speaking of peace, I'm going to transition now to the protests that are going on in LA. Right off the bat, do you support the president's decision to send the National Guard and Marines into Los Angeles without having spoken with the governor ahead of time with that?
I think it's always important that every American has the opportunity and the ability to speak their voice. Of course, our Constitution protects freedom of speech, but what has happened over the past several weeks is that it's become violent. And when you start to see our law enforcement attacked by protesters, then that crosses a different line. And we saw these riots take place in 2020 and in 2021. And I think that it's important for us to be sure that people aren't injured, that our police are protected, and that property isn't damaged. And so the fact that President Trump is sending the National Guard and the Marines, I think, is an important message, even though they're oftentimes around the perimeter, letting the LAPD be the ones to really interact with the protesters. I think that support is important to be able to make sure that people in Los Angeles are protected and kept safe, and that there isn't damage to property. Because if we let it go and there's more fires and more damage and people potentially injured or even killed, it's going to set off even greater unrest there, and we don't need that. That's not who we are as Americans. Peacefully protest, but don't be attacking police officers or destroying property.
And then President Trump is reportedly calling this a rebellion, the protests that are happening in LA. If you are comparing this to the January 6th riots, why do you believe that he has chosen to send troops in to California when troops were not sent in to January 6th?
So on January 6th, President Trump did offer Speaker of the House Nancy Pelosi National Guard, and she reportedly turned it down. So I think that's the difference here, that President Trump has shown himself to be over and over supportive of law enforcement, supportive of security, keeping people safe. That's one thing that we all want as Americans, is that we want to know that we can walk through the streets of our cities and be safe. We want to know that we can, travel through the countryside and be safe. And in this situation, we know that some of this is organic in protesting, which is always the way you would want it, but some of it is organized to create chaos. And I think that's what we're going to find out over time. Just as Senator Padilla walked into this press conference with Secretary Kristi Noem, there's a right way to do it and a wrong way to do it. He walked into the press conference disrupting it without his congressional pin on. He didn't notify who he was. And so the fact that they stopped him and arrested him is not the proper way to have a dialogue. And so I think President Trump, there is a difference between these sorts of riots and what happened on January 6th. No police officer was assaulted or harassed. The one lady who was killed was a civilian that was killed in the Capitol, and there were no fires set. It was a very different scene January 6th. Now, it had to be dealt with. It had to be addressed. You can't let a crowd of people take over the U.S. Capitol and cause any sort of damage or destruction, because there were some that were part of that day that did want to do damage. But this is very different. And watching how this is unfolding, it's important for us to make sure our law enforcement is able to do their job and protect our civilians.
And then with protests slated across the country tomorrow, there's also some for here in Fort Wayne. Do you feel the president may possibly order more troops to other protests around the country?
I think that, a lot of this is going to depend on our local law enforcement and the mayors of our cities and how they handle it. And, my hope is that, anyone who wants to come out to voice their opinion in Fort Wayne or in Kendallville or Angola or any city in the district, that they have that right to do that. And they have the right to do it safely, and that no one is injured. But our law enforcement and our police officers also have to be supported as well, that if there's going to be violence, if there's going to be an attack on any individual, whether it's police or a private individual, that cannot be tolerated. And so that is always what has made America a strong democracy. But when those lines are crossed, that's when law enforcement should and has to step in to be sure that every American is kept safe.
And then do you have anything you'd like to say to your constituents ahead of tomorrow's protests?
Yeah, well, first of all, as Americans, we should also all be proud of our military men and women who serve our country voluntarily. And the parade that is taking place in Washington, D.C. is something that is a first for us in a long time. But the world is a dangerous place. As I mentioned, I was over in Israel a couple of weeks ago, and we see the attacks on Israel on a daily basis. We had to go to bomb shelters twice while we were there. And so we can truly be thankful as Americans that we live in a safe country that doesn't have the threats of missiles or rockets being launched at us on a daily basis. But we also, there are disagreements in our country as well, and that's a democratic process. And our military is protecting our right to freedom of speech. But as people go out and enjoy the summer day, but also make their voice heard, let's also just remember to be respectful of one another, and especially our law enforcement. That's a very dangerous job, and we want to make sure that our law enforcement men and women are able to go home to their families as well.
And then from here, I'm going to go ahead and transfer over to the reconciliation bill. What is your opinion on that bill as a whole right now?
Yeah, so it's called One Big Beautiful Bill by the president, and what it's as it moves through the House, which is passed the House and now in the Senate. But the One Big Beautiful Bill it's really important to pass because it keeps taxes where they're currently at. At the end of 2025, those tax rates are set to expire. And 90% of Americans would see a tax increase. Small businesses would see a tax increase. The other important piece is in there is that there's no tax on tips, which is important for our restaurants and for our wait staff in whether it's restaurants or in the service industries that receive tips. That's a huge boost to being able to just take that money home rather than paying it in taxes. No tax on overtime is also a great benefit for us as Americans. Of course, we live in the strongest manufacturing belt in the country in Northeast Indiana, and there's a lot of overtime that's put in. It's beneficial for employees. It's also beneficial for production. There's also the Golden Dome funding is in this bill as well. We build the satellites for our national defense right in Fort Wayne. And that's something that we can all be very proud of, that we're part of that system that's going to protect America from any sort of intercontinental ballistic missiles, especially as we watch China continue to build up their war machine, and we're not sure for what purposes. So it's in the Senate. There's some negotiating that's still going back and forth, but hopefully we'll get the bill passed where President Trump can sign it into law by July 4th.
And then is there any part of the bill that you have any issue with or would like to see changed?
Yeah, there's what they call the SALT provision, which is state and local tax deductions, and that really benefits states like New York and California, where they're high tax states. We're fortunate in Indiana to be a low tax state. Our cost of living is much lower than it is in New Jersey or New York or Illinois or California, and so the citizens there, they get to write those high taxes off of their federal taxes. Well, that it is disproportionate to those of us like in Indiana or Tennessee or Texas or Florida, where we don't have high taxes. We're not a high tax state. And I think that that's something that needs to be looked at, that we don't treat American taxpayers differently because of the state that we live in, whether it's a high tax or a low tax state. We want to be a low tax state. We're seeing growth in our population. We're seeing growth in our economy. And I think that that's a provision that needs to be dealt with in the Senate, and hopefully they'll deal with that.
And then it looks like I have time for just one more, maybe.
Okay.
So what do you say to people concerned about the possibility of Medicaid cuts with this bill and being able to afford their health care?
Yeah, so Medicaid cuts, there's a lot of disinformation right now about it cutting people that deserve Medicaid. It doesn't. It actually, if you're here illegally, you should be concerned about Medicaid cuts, because we're not going to continue to allow those illegals here to be on Medicaid programs. And also, if you're an able-bodied individual that has the opportunity to work, that you could lose Medicaid benefits depending on means testing. And so I think those are all important pieces that people need to realize. The mom out there that is, still has children at home or has a disabled individual in their family, that's what Medicaid is for. And we want to keep that program and protect Medicaid for the Americans that truly need the help, rather than people taking advantage of it. In fact, just one quick statistic, California, again, it's a high cost state, takes over about $160 billion a year from the federal government just for Medicaid costs, where just that number alone is larger than the entire budget of the state of Florida. And so we've got to get states like California and New York to stop taking advantage of the program, where again, we see that as taking advantage of Americans in states like Indiana.
And then it looks like I have about 2 minutes left. Is there anything else that you would like to say that we haven't touched on at this time?
I think that covers the hot topics of the day. Is there anything else? Yeah, but no, I mean, I think finally, I would just say that with this weekend and what's going on in Israel, in Iran, there's people in Iran that want to see freedom as well, and they want to see a regime change. So I think that this weekend is a good weekend for all of us as Americans. Not only to be praying for our country and what's happening in Los Angeles and other parts of the country, but let's pray for peace here at home and abroad.
All right, well then I think that wraps it up for us. I
All
really,
right.
again, appreciate you taking the time to talk with us today.
You bet. Thank you.